Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our guest speaker for being here, coming all the way down from Northern Virginia to be with us this morning. Tim Hammond is our guest speaker. He grew up in New Albany, Indiana, and he was recruited by the U.S. Coast Guard Academy because he was a diver. And he was a championship diver in Indiana and went to the Coast Guard Academy, not on a scholarship, because everybody goes on a scholarship, but nevertheless, he was on the diving team at the Coast Guard Academy. He graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1996 and has served with distinction in both operational and training staff kinds of jobs throughout his career since 1996. He's been on 6 Coast Guard ships, so he is not just a staff puke. He commanded 3 ships, the Chicoteague and the Padre, which are 110-foot island-class cutters, and then he also commanded the Confidence, which is a 211-foot cutter in one of his very tough assignments at Cape Canaveral, Florida. I mean, life has been tough for Tim. Among his achievements as an operational Coast Guardsman, he search and rescue, humanitarian assistance, environmental protection, law enforcement, and he served from the Bering Sea to the Eastern Pacific and a lot in the Caribbean. So Tim and I became acquainted when Tim was commanding the Yorktown Training Center, which is his penultimate assignment, and he attended Mass with our family, and we got to know him very well at that time, and it was our privilege to know both Tim and his wife and son, Noah. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard felt it necessary for Tim to go and do bigger and better things, so now he is in charge of all Coast Guard training at the Puzzle Palace up in Washington, D.C. We are very privileged to have you here, Tim. Thank you very much, and I surrender the mic to you, sir.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Can you hear me okay? Okay. A little louder, okay. I'm going to try something. First, I'm going to show you a little bit of a video. So as Paul said, I've spent my career in the Coast Guard bouncing back and forth between operational units and our training system, making sure that we're developing our workforce to be able to go out and execute the mission that we ask them to do. And just last week, we were running a course off the coast of Oregon, and this is a little bit of a video, a news thing, because you know, it's in the Coast Guard, we are what we call one deep in the organization, right? We don't have a garrison, so when we pull someone out of training and we pull them out of their unit, there's a hole at that unit, and that unit is less capable until we get them back, fully trained up. For our rescue swimmers, these are the guys and gals that jump out of helicopters. That's a pretty risky endeavor, right? And then sometimes they wait a whole career to get a really good rescue. Sometimes it just happens fortuitously, like last week. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
Feeds into the Pacific Ocean, an area that's notorious for rough waters.
And you may not be able to hear this.
Called the graveyard of ships. For members of the U.S. Coast Guard rescue team, this is not a drill. Someone on board this boat, the Sandpiper, issued a mayday call, and rookie diver, 22-year-old Petty Officer 3rd Class Branch Walton, is the first in the water. His first real-life rescue mission ever.
It was luck of the draw. I mean, there was 7 other rescue swimmers in the classroom when we heard the mayday call, and we kind of did rock, paper, scissors for it. All of them were itching to go. They all could have got it done, but I got lucky.
Moments later, the boat capsizes. The waters at the mouth of the Columbia River in Oregon were too much. Walton finds the boat's captain, and the 2 are hoisted to safety. A rescue that happened as Coast Guard crews were training on this very scenario in the same part of the river.
Right after the case, I went, got my certificate, and graduated it.
While Walton is all smiles, the man he saved, 35-year-old Jericho Labonte, is on the run. Police believe the boat he was piloting was stolen. And then there's this. Police in Astoria, Oregon,
There's some extra of the
say
story.
this is the same man, caught on video, for some reason, leaving a dead fish on the porch of a home made famous by the movie Goonies, right after the house was sold. A man who tonight may be on dry land, but remains in hot water, wanted by several agencies, including the U.S. Coast Guard. Police say that Labonte was released from the hospital.
So what you were seeing there, there's actually two training elements that you were seeing. Obviously, the focus was on the rescue swimmers. The boats that you were seeing in the water, that's also where we train that's our National Motor Lifeboat School, which is where we train our surfmen to operate in those kind of conditions. So they were actually doing joint training between the boats and the helicopters for the rescue swimmers. It's a unique environment on our coastline. It's one of the only places we get a consistent surf conditions only at certain times of the year. So that course we have to specifically schedule between December to about next week, and trying to fit the members within the Coast Guard that already are trained up to operate in kind of those conditions, is to bring them out like a finishing school, if you will, to get them to be able to, how do you put a boat in tow in those kind of conditions, right? And knowing that the beach isn't very far off from that break. So that's what you can't quite see within the video. But just a fascinating one small segment of what we see throughout our things. Yeah.
That's why you had those huge breakers. You weren't that far from the beach.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the way it works out off of Cape Disappointment. Right. That's where we go to train. Why would you not train anywhere else, right? It's Cape Disappointment. So the first break usually occurs at about half a mile out, and then you get a subsequent beach break as you get further in, depending on where along the coastline you are. But anyway, well, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, as I said, I operate in both theaters in the operational community, but I also operate in our training community, and I have done for the last 12 years or so of my career. Since Admiral Schultz left, when he took over about 4 years ago as the new commandant, we developed the strategy for looking at how do we take our legacy training system that is pretty much, post-World War II, it's kind of an industrial model. It's like someone comes in, it doesn't matter what they come in the door with, we're going to train you to this standard, and then we're going to push you out and put you out in the field. As we start looking at that, does that make sense in today's environment, right? What's changed? Our technology has changed. The caliber of people that we bring into the organization has changed. They come in with more skills and more knowledge. So why don't we take advantage of that and actually do two things? One, drive down the cost overall, because I don't have to have them pulled out of their unit and brought somewhere, and so I can reduce cost there. So we had developed this strategy that we called modernized ready learning, and the benefit that we've foreseen, that we're reaping now, is that when Admiral Fagan took over this year as the new commandant, she was the vice commandant. So it's a strategy that endures, and it wasn't one that was like, okay, well, let's put that on the shelf and go on to the next thing, which is typical of what you see in large military organizations. So what is this modernized ready learning? So essentially it's a strategy that has four priorities that we look to maximize training opportunities for our members to really be able to deliver what they need and where they need it. Modernizing the way we actually deliver the training. Use technology to our advantage to increase the performance of a member in the field. Tailor those programs so that it actually is tailored to the individual and no longer just a group of people that show up, right? So get a little smarter about how we do things. And then lastly, we're looking to try to advance the resiliency through some of the trainings that we do, getting into emotional intelligence and looking at how do you provide that support for the member when they go through something, and let's say that case didn't work out as well, right? Now it's dealing with the traumatic incident of recovering a body and making sure that we're looking after that rescue swimmer and that air crew that's got to do that, right? Sometimes it doesn't go as well as that. And so that's some of what the priorities of the strategy are. As we're doing this, we're looking at different methodologies and different modalities of the delivery and how we do it, right? So we look at different ways of blending training, and sometimes, you have to define for senior leadership when we talk about things, and you say, well, is that remote learning? Is that virtual learning? What is that? So we have a term that we use, it's just blended, right? We'll look at the method, the staffing, and then the technology to get some kind of customized training journey for a member. And there, as you can see around the wheel, there's different ways we can do it, right? Especially with the advent of technology, like this 2-in-1 that I'm using here. Like when a student shows up at Yorktown now, they're issued a 2-in-1. So at night, they can do additional homework. They can do some other really cool stuff as that we've kind of come to do. All right. Maybe the cloud is not a good thing. I see the next slide. Doesn't want to advance. There we go. So a lot of times I'll deal with programs at headquarters that as we're going through this strategy, and there's change management we have to do as well. Because the way we design training or figure out, well, what training do you need? First, we do an analysis to really look at what's the problem. So we can really kind of pull all the pieces that influence that performance. So if it's a particular job, I want to know what environment are they operating in? What is the current policy, the current direction that the organization is saying, I want you to do this job, and I want you to do it to this standard? Have we even established that, right? So the programs at headquarters kind of set the policy piece that helps derive what we want people to do. We help figure out, okay, well then how do we get there? And so what I have to do a lot of times is when we'll say, hey, we're going to take this course that we've had for 20 years in a resident setting, and we're going to shift that to a blended format that's going to be facilitated online. So I don't have to bring a member from their unit. I can send them a laptop, and they can sit at their unit, and I can do via Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Kind of the pandemic allowed us to start getting into this. These are things that we've been dreaming about in the training world for probably about 10 years. But we could never get through that hurdle. But the pandemic, we actually seized the opportunity. In the Coast Guard, we always say, don't let a crisis go to waste. So we didn't let a crisis go to waste. So we have 315 advanced courses in our inventory. During the pandemic, we were able to push 36 of those because they're typically it's a course. If you think of, I go, I sit, I get lectured to, I maybe do some paperwork there, and then I go home. So it's all knowledge-based. I don't need to bring you to Yorktown to do knowledge-based. I can do that in today's society, today's technology. You could sit in your jammies at home for all I care, as long as you're engaged and we can go through the content and the delivery. So this is just a little bit of a matrix that we use when we get through an analysis and we figure out, okay, yes, we need to provide some skills and knowledge in order to execute the job, right? So training actually is an intervention besides policy or giving them new tools or new equipment. So a lot of people would say, well, how did you figure out that needed to be, that you could do this virtually? Well, so we developed this instructional method selection calculator. And these are kind of the elements that we use to get to, all right, is this in person? I got to bring somebody resident? Is this, this is a structured, I'd say standardized, but standardized and structured on the job. So we send them out, they'll have a coach at their unit, and they'll be able to walk through a very structured educational experience to help them increase their performance on the job. Is it facilitated online where it's actually synchronous? So think of like Microsoft Teams or Zoom that you saw kids during the pandemic doing. We go back and we kind of rework the curriculum so that it's a lot more engaging. And initially in the pandemic, instructors would just take the standard course that I'm doing, my standard slides, and I'd slap it up there and just teach. And we found that you can't do that. You've got to recreate how you do that, and you have to be very deliberate about how you create that environment online so that you can get the engagement from the student, if you will. If we don't do that, we can also do a self-paced e-learning, and that's just kind of, if you've ever done, your standard mandated training somewhere, whether it's in the government or if it's, I know when my wife sold cars at one point. This was what I love about military spouses. They do the most amazing jobs. And I remember her going through just like the compliance type of stuff, where it's EEO or a safety briefing, but it's just a standard like slide deck and you're kind of going through. Although we make them not quite just standard. We try to use a lot more stuff nowadays, a lot more tools. So, and the other thing I had to fight with in terms of change management with an organization, when you have such a long-term legacy, training center, Yorktown, when Admiral Thayer stood up the Reserve Training Center, that was what, 62, right? 58, yeah, it's 58. Yeah, it's 58. And so there's stuff that we've taught since then that's still legacy. So trying to get people's head wrapped around, we're going to do that different now, and we're going to do it on a computer. And that was like I was breaking glass somewhere. And but as part of the change management that you kind of go through. But the big thing, what we have to tell them, senior leadership and people within the organization, is it's not meant for everything. It's not like we're going to give you, like you see kids today with the 3D or with the Oculus headsets, and we're going to be in a virtual reality environment for everything. We will where it makes sense, but not everything is that way. Here at Yorktown, if it's a $1 million engine in the field, I don't want the first time someone's turning a wrench on that engine to be in the field, because a mistake that they make in the field could result in a catastrophic failure of $1 million engine. That's not insignificant, right? So that's where we look at, okay, that's something, because it's a risk, that's a greater risk. Let's do that in-house, where we have a static engine. We can take it apart all day long and go from there.
Tim, isn't that also true for your seamanship and teaching them how to manage boats?
Right.
And
Yeah.
rescues and
Mm-hmm.
so on? I mean,
Yeah, those guys operating in the surf, I can't teach that in a simulator,
exactly.
right? Because now I can train pilots all day long in a simulator, because we've been doing that for decades. It's funny, you talk about virtual reality, and people have a hard time wrapping their head around it, and they say, well, how is it? It's no different than if I put you in this or in this, right? Because those have existed within aviation for decades. Nowadays, it's just different because now we have a lot more capability, and you can reduce this to essentially a box that has all of the equipment, all the switches, all the gauges, and I can give you a headset that is what they call augmented reality, which allows you to look down and you can see your hands, but the minute you look up, you're looking at a digital horizon, just like you would be in the simulator. Now, it won't, it's not on hydraulics, so it won't articulate, but it's still, the interesting thing with virtual reality is it gets you to what they call presence, which it's immersive. So you legitimately, your brain makes a switch. You believe you're actually there. The funniest thing I see, my son watches America's Funniest Home Videos, and one of the favorite ones we see is there's a lady and her husband, and they're in, I think like Chuck E. Cheese with their grandkids, and they're on a roller coaster ride, but it's a virtual reality ride, right? And so she's got the headset on, and she's holding onto this bar, and the little seats that they're in, they move up and down a little bit, and a little bit, not much at all. She's screaming her head off, right? She is freaking out because she legitimately believes that she is on that roller coaster, and she is screaming. Her husband's just like trying to find her face and like, shut up. But a lot of stuff we've throughout our training system, at our 8 major training centers, we're in the process of putting Wi-Fi. Let's just make things more like a college campus, that our our young members that are coming into the Coast Guard, they're digital native. They don't know anything different, right? And it's an expectation for them. It's like, why do you not have Wi-Fi? Like, everywhere has Wi-Fi. Why does Training Center Yorktown not have Wi-Fi? Well, during the pandemic, the previous Vice Commandant, Admiral Ray, he gave us a lot of money, and it was good because now we have Wi-Fi in our campuses, which is great because it allows us to give students these 2-in-1 devices so that they can go back to, and this is, I'm going down the list here, they can do simulation within this. Like one of the things you can see the Caterpillar engine here over at Yorktown. We also have for our national security cutters, our MTU engine lab. For the MTU engine lab, what we've done is we actually go through and we digitally scan the parts. So we'll take a part out of an engine, digitally scan it, and we can create a 3D rendering so that the student can go back at night and say, what does the inside of that look like? How's that cylinder come apart? And they can manipulate just on the screen, rotate it, zoom in, zoom out, pull it apart. So it gives them a much deeper understanding before they even ever touch an engine. Like this is all pre-work that we want them to do before. The other thing that we do is we can use those same renderings and then actually use 3D printers to actually print them. And I can do them at different scales, right? So our traveling inspection teams that go and assess all of our boat units, they wanted to take a Pelican hook to be able to walk through crews like, hey, when you're doing deck evolutions and you got to use a Pelican hook, especially for our aids to navigation, this is how it works. Well, they used to carry this 50-pound steel Pelican hook. And they'd have to put that in luggage, go through an airport with it, right? Now it's like 2.5 pounds and it's plastic. And we can pull it all the way apart, put it back together. And so this is just a cylinder and rod. So for the engineering labs, we do the same thing, right? So the student can actually, instead of passing around, so for an MTU, that same part weighs about 100 pounds. And it's about this big around. That's a bit awkward to like move around in a classroom to get that deeper understanding of what is this thing that I'm looking at, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of prior experience with it. So it's just about a way that we can enrich the experience and make it a little bit deeper in understanding and getting there.
So you 3D printed it?
We did, yeah. The other thing we do is when I talked earlier about getting training delivered at a point of performance or when they need. Like, who's done this? And I don't know if you can tell me whether or not. Who's gone to YouTube to figure out how to do something? Right? We all have. So like, well, why should we not leverage that? Right? So if you have a phone, and I don't know if it'll work, if you try to take a picture of this QR code, which if you got it, you can try it right now. Let's see if it works. We're getting fancy now. This is like, well, it's not super fancy, but this is using the technology that's readily available in small little segments, right? You'll probably you don't have to go that close, as long as you can, if you pull it back a little bit. There you go. Well, you got to make sure you click it before it.
Got it.
This is like interactive, right? The QR code will take you right to the link above it, and it's actually from our electrician lab here about how to find a cable fault, right? And it's just a 5-minute quick video, and this one's done by the instructors. We actually ask people in the field, we started when we asked the question, how many times when you're in the field and someone says, yeah, how many times do you just like, how do I do something? Or how many times when, we're at a schoolhouse and we would get a call from the field that would ask, hey, how do you do X? Or I'm not sure I understand this. That is where we are trying to get to. So that way when they get those questions, hey, go make a quick YouTube video. Make it short, get to the point, demonstrate how you can get to that performance, and then get it up there so that those in the field can grab it when they need it at the point of performance. Sometimes we do it where it makes sense because it's risk. It costs a lot of money, and it's a high risk endeavor. This is a prime example. So a few years ago, our flight mech hoist operator, right? So the guy that was in the helicopter in the beginning, hoisting that swimmer up and down, in order to get that person certified or qualified in that position, it used to take about 10 or so flights and over a year, and you'd only get like 1, maybe 2 students through a year, right? Just because you have to do it in the airframe, and it's usually tagged on to, well, we're already doing a training flight, let's get a couple hoists in. They may get 5 hoists in on a training flight, and it'd take, several times when so they can finally get someone comfortable enough up and qualified, right? Because it's usually done, they have someone who already is qualified teaching someone else. So we partnered with the Canadians and with the Navy and found a company that does this immersive VR hoist simulator out in Arizona. And so here he is. This is a virtual reality headset that's plugged into the airframe. So this is an exact replica of the hoist system. This thing actually maneuvers to actually operate just as if you're holding the cable, and gives you that same tactile feel as if you're actually in the helicopter. The other thing that is great is these guys will do 250 hoists in 12 days, right? So the repetition and the proficiency, and because what he's seeing, he or she is seeing in their headset, they believe that they get that immersed, that presence experience is what they call, as if they're there. The other thing that they can do is we can do it at night. You can do it in blinding wind and rain. You can create all those conditions. Now, you won't feel the rain, but you will see that in the virtual environment. And so what the greatest new thing with this is we had a member that we'd sent him off to the school. He gets back to his unit. They get a SAR case. It's a cliffside rescue off the Oregon coast. I think it was Oregon. Anyway, it's a cliffside rescue. It's this kid's first hoist ever. Actual in the helicopter, live hoist. But he's had 250 plus evolutions in the simulator. Right? So send somebody down, we'll pick them right up and let's go. Right? So that is where that's where we're looking to use virtual reality and immersive experiences like that to be able to, because it makes sense. It drives down the cost. So if you think about the number of training flights, the cost of a flight hour is roughly $800-900 an hour, right? And that only goes up with time because there's a fuel cost, but then there's just the sheer risk. You shear a cable. It's a risky endeavor to fly a helicopter anyway. Who's my helicopter pilots? Do we have any? I hope not. You'd be in the wrong audience. Yeah. Well, right? I mean, it's a risky endeavor. Yeah. And that's the other part of it too, right? So you go up on a training flight, you're using it, you're going to be doing maintenance on the back end of it, right? So trying to drive down the cost. So that's just a little bit of an overview of kind of some of what we're doing as part of this, our modernized ready learning strategy in bringing us into the future of technology and using it and leveraging it where it makes sense so that we can help our young men and women go out and do phenomenal things day in and day out. So, and with that, I will take any questions.
Tim, could
Yeah.
you identify the communities in the Coast Guard? The Navy has the aviation community, the surface warfare community, the submarine community. Is it a similar distribution of effort in the Coast Guard?
Yes. So there's, the afloat community. That's most of all of your ships. You have what we call the ashore community, which is most of your, like here in Sector Virginia, they control the local areas. That's all the small boat stations that you see scattered along the coast. So that's the ashore community. There's the aviation community, obviously. And then there's the marine inspection community. When that's the group of folks that go out and inspect all of our merchant ships coming in and out to ensure that they're in compliance with IMO and U.S. regulations. So those are like the 4 major ones. And then we have communities like the intelligence community, the legal community, the HR community, the IT community. My good friend Rick back there. So there's several smaller communities, but a lot of what you'll see is those main four, and people will have those secondary communities, they bounce back and forth. So there's a whole community within the human resources, like specifically within the training community, right? That's so I kind of dual had in both of those communities. So.
Naval engineering is still one of them.
And naval engineering.
I spent 6
Yeah.
months of them over at York,
Mhm.
and ended up in Portsmouth
Yep.
as a co-op.
Yep.
Completely reorganized their plan folder.
Yep.
This is a question for you.
Sure.
I'm a neighbor of yours. My property is only separated by the Coast Guard station by the mouth of the York River.
Oh.
So since you're coming from the base,
Mhm.
and been there for many years, can you share with us what is in the planning phase, or what do you think is going to happen with the base? I'm talking about physical structures, buildings, pier, is modernization, the front gate, the whole work.
Yeah.
And I use your facilities a lot. I use your pool
Yeah.
and your ID section. I love the base. And I'm just curious if you could share with us
Sure.
any proposed changes to the buildings, new piers, or what have you.
Sure. Sure. So just before I got there, as I got there, we finished up actually one of our newest buildings, which is the range. So we built a brand new $13 million indoor firearms range
Okay.
at the end of the base down near Wormley Creek, right at the entrance to Wormley Creek.
Now, when you say it's a range, what kind of arms are we talking about?
So that range is capable up to 7.62 millimeters. So
Okay.
essentially, we can do what we call the M240
Right.
in there. We don't that much.
M16 is-
M16s, yeah,
And
and
it's
all
an
small
indoor
arms.
range?
It's indoor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? I'm curious on
Sure.
the buildings where the students live.
Mhm.
You know, that's what I see when I
Right.
go out my backyard.
Yeah.
And the pier. And just curious on, we're going to see more ships? Or
So yeah, there's no right now there's no plans to renew the pier,
Okay.
right? Because there's no plans for us to bring a ship back up to Yorktown
Okay.
as a training platform, because the ships that used to be here as training platforms were here because Officer Candidate School was the prime reason that it was here. And since Officer Candidate School is now up at New London at the Academy, we don't really have a need to have a training ship per se. Now that's what I know today.
Right.
That may change, as we look at how do we train our bosun mates, because our bosun mates also do all of our navigation work, what our legacy quartermasters used to do. And so we're already training them now in navigation and seamanship, mostly focused around small vessels. But what do we do? How does it work when we get to large vessels?
We often see
So.
the small boat unit,
Mhm.
their pier is in Wormley Creek.
Mhm.
They're coming out, they're training, and they often stop for lunch.
Yeah.
at Yorktown. And we're grateful. We are.
Yeah.
We're grateful to see the sailors out there and doing things and practicing and everything like that. And I'm just curious on what's in the future for the base.
Yeah, so for
Ben and Jerry's is owned by an ex-chief.
we're not. There is no plans to move Training Center Yorktown, not in my lifetime. But no, we're looking at as we get new capability and new assets, right? So as we brought on the national security cutters, which replaced our legacy high endurance cutters, we created a new engine lab specifically for them. As we are bringing on the offshore patrol cutter, which will replace all of our medium endurance cutters like the 270-foot ships you see down in Portsmouth, those assets a lot of them will end up here in Portsmouth. And so the training that we'll do for the engineering systems will go at Yorktown. And that will be probably the next construction phase. That may not happen for a few more years off because so Eastern Shipyard had the original contract for them. They were on contract to do the first 4 hulls. And then they had the hurricane in Pensacola, kind of shut their operation down for a little bit. There were a lot of delays. So we ended up going for a recompete for the second phase of the offshore patrol cutters, which was won by, I think, Austell, I think is the shipyard, which is down in Pascagoula. And so eventually we'll have figuring out, like making sure that we have common systems. That's, from a training perspective, that's what I want to see, right? I want to make sure that, I hope that we get the same engines for, and so now I don't have different ones. And I know that's in the acquisition phase, and that's in the design specs for have the commonality. So that way we're training on one thing, and I'm not having to train, again, getting smarter with the way we do stuff. So.
Well, we're curious, because the base structure itself hasn't really changed.
No,
much.
no. Those barracks were built in the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we owned bought a house in '76, but I've been in this area since '72.
Yeah.
And fished off the pier, crabbed off the pier.
Yeah.
Used the facility, living across the mouth of the river there, using Sarah's Creek and everything. And not much has changed.
Nope, nope.
I heard that you were coming tonight today.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd ask you a question.
Yeah. No, good questions. Yeah. Again, right now, not a whole lot is going to change. The next things will be providing some new lab space for new equipment that's coming on. Yes, ma'am.
Well, the students, when they finish their training, then are they stationed all over the place?
They come from all over the place. Yeah, everywhere from Guam to we'll have people that are stationed in Europe that will come back for some of our marine inspection courses. Oh no, they're not just new folks. No, ma'am. Yeah, we have a lot of our A school students. So at Training Center Yorktown, Training Center Petaluma, that's where we train when students come out of boot camp, they'll go to their first unit. They'll spend about 6 months to a year, depending on what the wait list looks like for a particular course. Then they will come to the course, and that gives them their base trade, if you will, right? So that's where they learn to be an electrician, they learn to be a cook. The other services call it MOS. That's their rating. And so that's what there's this group of students, we do 7 of the ratings here in Yorktown. And then once they're done with that, they'll go back out to their unit. Usually the A school students will get transitioned to a new unit, and they'll go fill a vacancy somewhere in the organization, again, worldwide, depending on what's out and available for them. Then there will be those students that later need to come back as they transition from one unit to another unit. And I might be going from a shore station to a ship where there might be a specific piece of machinery that I don't know currently, but I need to get trained on it before I report to the ship. So I'll come here to Yorktown to go through the engineering school to get whatever that particular, whether it's a generator or a gyro or an engine group. So. Well, we'll get so for the A school students, they'll get a list of billets that are available or job vacancies that are open, and then they get a chance to select what they want, and then the detailers at headquarters, they play some magic and they figure out who goes where. Yes, sir, in the back.
Don't forget, the Coast Guard Station also trains foreign students.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, we also train our international community here at Yorktown as well. Yes, sir. Yeah, so it's predominantly for the cadets and the officer candidates at the academy. It's one of those things you're like, the Eagle's built in 1935.
Yeah, but the unit's not here.
No, it's based out of New London. That's where its home port it is. But it spends a lot of time in Baltimore in the yard because every time we sail it, then we got to bring it back. And hey, you're all boaters. Boat stands for bring out another 1,000. So, I think there's part of me that believes that at some point we will legitimately just like rebuild the Eagle. But yeah, it's a phenomenal. I was telling Paul last night, it's a phenomenal ship to sail. I know Rick's had some time on it, and it is just phenomenal when that ship is under full sail and just clipping along. And I'll never forget being, a freshman. After my freshman year, we were sailing from Bermuda back up to the academy, and I'll never forget I was on the bridge and I looked over and, we're doing 17.5 knots in a 235 foot, the bar, or 295. the Bark Eagle. Just heeled over, quiet, just amazing. So,
Tim,
yeah.
may I interrupt for
Yeah.
just a second? So we have to take a little bit of an interruption. We'll take more questions afterwards, but we have a presentation to make, and we need to do it now. So, please.
How did you know?
Please.
Captain Tim Hammond, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you being a speaker at the Seadog series. So this is for you.
Thank you.
We will be dedicating a book to the Yorktown Library in your name. There'll be a book plate in the front of the book.
awesome.
The Yorktown Library is currently moving back into its new thing.
Ah.
So they haven't been able to decide which titles they're going to do. But as soon as I get that, I will mail it off to you.
Thank you.
And then you can come to the library and pick up your book.
Oh, we missed the library.
There you go. I'm right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, sir. On an average day, before the pandemic and before we started doing more stuff virtual, I would see, depending on the time of year, averaged out about 730 students a day. Now we're at about it's back over 600. So we're around 600 now. Yeah. So the Polar Security, the Polar Security program is it's still active. I'd have to go on if you go on the Coast Guard's website and you look up Coast Guard acquisitions, they usually have a page that kind of gives the latest of what is the status of each acquisition. And the Polar Security cutters are like we need new icebreakers, right? So the Polar Star is still in operations. That's our only heavy icebreaker that goes down to Antarctica. The Coast Guard cutter Healy is our medium icebreaker that goes up to the Arctic. And the mission set's changed, right? Those were predominantly built for science operations. Well, the world's changed. So if we're operating in the high latitudes, we need a ship that can be multi-mission. So that if a cruise ship decides to go to Antarctica and break down, well, how do you get them? How do you get after that, right? Or you start doing greater oil exploration off the North Shore of Alaska. What do you do for a pollution response? What kind of capabilities? So those are all things that are going into the design of the Polar Security cutters, not just science operations like years have passed. So I don't know when we're going to see the first one. So that's the hopefully sooner than later. I know that the desire is to have 3 of each, 3 heavy and 3 light or 3 medium. So it'll be we'll see what time tells us. But
So I saw on your breakdown in first and second
Mhm.
training, you're 89 and 11%.
yeah,
Do you have a goal to increase the virtual to in the business world I
Right.
operate in, we're at 70% virtual.
Yeah.
30% in person because of the high cost of travel.
right, yeah. I don't have a set goal, right? What my desire is to go through every course, because most of the stuff we design is performance based. And I don't want to develop a course unless I know that there's a actual performance that we need to observe someone to do, which would require them to travel in person. There are still courses that we have in inventory that are still pretty much just a lecture series, and it's like those are the ones I'm trying to get after. But what you see of some of that percentage, because of the initial during the pandemic, it's kind of easy. You go like, oh yeah, that's just, Joe's just talking head up there. So we can do that online. But changing out, parts on an engine. So yeah, so I don't really have a specific goal except to go back through the inventory and look for other opportunities, or look for opportunities where we can use more VR and getting into it, right? And how can we enhance that? One of the things I didn't talk about in here is we took our marine inspectors. So these are the ones that go out and inspect vessels. We have redesigned that whole construct of how we train them. Because at every Coast Guard sector, at our major, there's 38? I think 38 sectors. At these captains of the port, like so here in Virginia, there's a longtime civilian Marine inspector, what we call the Marine Inspector Training Officer, the MITO. And their whole job is to train up the new people. Well, we used to have a course here at Yorktown that was 5 weeks long, right? But by the time that the person, you know, and I can't remember the number of new inspectors that we would get across the organization, let's just say it's 400, well, the class would only hold 30. So by the time I actually get someone, they may have been in the job, actually learning on the job for the last year. So why in the world would I bring them here to sit in a classroom for something they already know how to do? So we've gone back and kind of looked for areas of opportunity that we can do that same thing. So now what we do is when they get to that new job, we've developed more of the self-paced e-learning courses to kind of get through the knowledge work and then they'll spend a day doing, you know, computer stuff. The next day they're with that MITO in like their own little classroom there at the unit, going deeper into the material and the regulations. The third day they're out on an inspection, right? So they're actually getting to walk through and understanding of how things are going. So that's a model that we're looking to try to, which will drive down cost of travel, but it also gives people credit for what they do on a day in and day out basis and in the performance of work, which is what we know actually sinks in deeper and someone gets better. That's how they get better anyway. So, sir.
Are you able to keep up the IMOC and the way that it's done? I mean, I know part of that thing was just all these guys from all over the world getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And then be able to talk to each other together and yarn on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they are actually on board right now.
Yes. I think I've played for every one of their graduations over the years.
So for the rest of you, the here at Training Center Yorktown, our International Training Division has a class that is the International Maritime Officers Course, and it's designed for up and coming like 04s, 05s from around the globe, and our partner navies and coast guards from around the world. They come and they usually have about 35 to 45 of them, and we have them for it's 13 weeks. And so we put them through different courses that we have at Yorktown through our search and rescue school, incident management, you know, those type of things that like how we operate as a Coast Guard. We link up with, who does the legal? We have some folks come in and do like maritime law and talk about maritime law. We do some of the maritime law enforcement, so we actually put them in a mat room and put them in LE gear and get hands-on. And then they do a field studies tour where we'll take them up to the Coast Guard Academy. They'll go see the UN to kind of give them an exposure on a bigger scale of how this works. And what we've seen is, so the IMOC's been in existence for roughly 17 years. Some of those previous graduates are now commandants of their Coast Guards and their navies, right? So it's an investment from a U.S. national security perspective of, hello, friend, welcome, right? One day, you will be the commandant of Costa Rica's Coast Guard. So, works out really well.
Tim, we have a lot of members who have relationships with the Coast Guard Reserve. What is the active Coast Guard's training relationship with the Reserve?
So, let me make sure I understood your question.
Do you train the Coast Guard Reserve?
We do, yeah, yes, yeah. So essentially when we do a breakdown of what we call a quota, right, which is a seat in a class. Every year, the programs at headquarters will say, this is how many they'll forecast and say, this is how many this is how many law enforcement officers I need. And that'll be the active component. Then the reserve component will say, wait a second, I have a requirement that I need this number. And then they have to work together to say, okay, how many are we going to defer from the active side for a year so that we can get the reserve quotas built in? Or can I go back down? Then they'll come to us and say, or can you build me another class? Like, do you have the capacity to handle specifically a reserve-only class? And then some courses we look, again, getting smarter with technology. So our reserves, and this is one of our first blended courses we did back in, this is when I got out of grad school in 2006, we had a online, and it was very simplistic, so it was kind of PowerPoint, click around. But that was all of the classroom stuff that you would need for law enforcement. That's your authority and jurisdiction, your regulations, all of that. And they would do that, and then they would come to the Law Enforcement Academy in Charleston for their 2-week ADT. So we designed it so that that 2 weeks is nothing but practical, hands-on, doing boardings, and any of the defensive tactics stuff, they actually did that during their IDT periods, during their weekend drills at the various units that they're stationed at. So, and it's been pretty successful. So, yeah.
And how heavily does the active Coast Guard rely on it?
Depends on the nature of the contingency, and how long the contingency goes, right? Because, as I said earlier, we're one deep. There's no garrison, right? So the reserve kind of is our garrison. So when we have an oil spill or, or a hurricane, there's usually that first probably week or so where it's mostly active duty, and then we're pretty much saying, okay, we need call in some reserves, let's get some help. But usually organizationally, headquarters wants to use the reserve more as a backfill national contingency type. We'll look for those big things. And then on the weekends, though, when they're not doing that, when they do their IDTs, a lot of them are at the stations, and so you might see them out, on a boat doing boardings on the weekends.
Right.
Sure.
Are there any tours or facilities that civilians would have access to at the training center?
Not currently. I would like to. COVID kind of prevented me from doing some stuff I wanted to do. At one point, I had a gentleman that was he had ancestors that lived in York Village, right, which is at the back of the training center off of Wormley Creek. That's where the original York settlement was. And he had gone through the archives and was trying to find some of the, anything he could figure out, where were buildings, we still have the foundation for the church that's back there. And those are things that I think would just be fantastic for people to see. So what he was trying to do, and I had set it up where I was going to be able to have him come in and 3D map that portion of the base to create a digital rendition of what it would look like back then. And that would be, we could kind of put it up front and necessarily kind of on a stop on the tour route with the battlefield. So.
Could you leave the barcode up when you finish so I can scan it in after?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now,
Oh okay.
yeah.
Have you found any remnants from the Civil War? Like battle
On the base?
plans or what have you, or fortifications there?
Well, yeah,
I know
so-
that on the other side of Wormley Creek is where the Union had set up, but I was just wondering if anything has been discovered on your side of Wormley Creek.
Yes. So there's a Civil War, there's a trench, essentially, that runs from Wormley Creek kind of up through the base, and so it looks like a ditch, right? I mean, that's what it looks like, but yeah, and I think when they did do some excavation or they moved some stuff around, they would find some, small shot or little pipes or, just fragments of stuff. So, yeah, not a lot. No cannons. So. Sure.
Well, I'm retired Coast Guard as well. Ace Navigation, the exhibits at
Yeah.
display in Yorktown are better than any museum in
Yeah.
society in the country.
Yeah.
Those, if I can help set up a tour, I'm sure people in Yakima will enjoy seeing
Yeah.
it because it's.
That's the way you can do it. Is if you have somebody who has a military ID, you can come on as a guest.
So if somebody's interested, let me know.
Yeah.
I'll try to set something.
Yeah, especially in Canfield Hall, you're absolutely right. We have some of the largest Forenso lenses in the world that came out of lighthouses, and they're
From Governor's Island when he all closed.
when we closed it, yeah. So, sure.
A little bit of information about the Coast Guard Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, they had a 100th birthday, was that the academy or was that just the Coast Guard? Like, what, 15 years ago?
It would have been the academy, maybe, because the Coast Guard, we trace it back to,
Maybe the Academy in New London.
maybe the academy in New London, yeah.
Academy goes back to 1876.
Yeah.
Well, when they had the 100th anniversary, man lived at Marlbank Farm, Otis Stevens carved polar bear that they,
Oh, for Obji?
yeah. It's just another connection.
Yeah.
Yorktown to
Oh, wow.
the Coast Guard.
Yeah, they were bronze of it.
Yeah.
New London.
Cool.
I was really glad to see that y'all dredged the channel over Wormley Creek straight.
Well, it's, you know,
All the muck in the creek itself.
yeah, so I'm glad I wasn't here when they were doing it, because they were telling me, like, how they did it. You know, they were basically pumping it out over across the base, basically right through the CO's yard, and back down to the beach. And the aroma was I do. There's a really nice beach there now for me. But you only see it at low tide, so that's the downside. But I'm glad they did too. Like when I first got here, I think it may have been the first lighted boat parade, and this was what, 19, I think, was the first one when I got here, Rick. I was down on the docks judging, and I went up, and when I came back down, I saw one of the instructors, because we had two of the boats down. He said, "Captain, you want to ride back?" I said, "Well, absolutely." Like, I don't want to have to drive back. We'll figure out the car tomorrow. If I get a boat ride, absolutely. And then the question was, "You going to let me drive?" And they were like, and then of course it was, "Yes, sir." Until we get to Wormley Creek, and then I said, "Yeah, it's all yours at that point."
It's an awful long ways from that first red marker, which apparently doesn't have a light on it anymore. As I can tell, at least I can't see it unless it's just directed straight,
Yeah.
shore.
Yeah.
And then from there, all the way to the mouth of the creek, that's a long ways to stay
Yeah.
straight in a 50-foot channel.
Yeah, when they were, I was amazed because we were on one of the 45-foot boats, and I was amazed at just how close, the BM1 was getting to the pylon. I'm like, you want me to change something on that while we're here? Because it's literally, I felt like I could just, touch it, right?
Well, the chart shows that there's supposed to be a flashing light at the beginning of the thing, but I've been out there by a friend that
Yeah.
lives over in the Waterview house many times, watching 4th of July fireworks.
Right.
I never see a
The light, huh?
there at all.
I don't know. We'll have to.
But
Well,
the chart says it's supposed to be there.
yeah. Well, we'll have to call the local guys and say what. So those of you who live on the creeks, and you may have seen something in the last few years. I know we were just talking about. You'll see some of our small aids to navigation boats out now, and that was a new course we developed because we started seeing an issue where our young coxswains were overdriving them or were not really operating them as safely as they should, and we were putting people in the water, or they just kind of lost situational awareness of where the load is when they've got buoys on deck and what that does to the stability. And so part of it, we stood up a new course to actually teach people like, oh no, here's how everything from your day starts, you're going to go make sure that the trailer is set, you're going to hook it up, you're going to go put it in the water, you're going to go out, you're going to set some buoys, do all your logs and all the things that are necessary, and then you're going to come back. So it's all performance-based. But what it did was it drives the confidence of a coxswain who may be running like pursuit stuff at one tour, at one assignment, gets transferred to an aids to navigation unit, and driving a over the horizon ribs that go 45, 50 knots, and they're chasing drug runners, to switch the mindset of, wait, I've got this, trailerable aids to navigation boat that's way different. And underpowered to begin with. So, but yeah.
I had a great trumpet player who was just dying to graduate and get back on a boat.
Listen, thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
We thank you for giving us so much of your time, answering so many of our questions. We are indebted to you, and we'll get that book commemoration out to you as soon as we possibly can.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well,
very
thank you all.
much.